I'm Jen Kiaba. I'm a photo-based artist here in New York, and today I'm taking you on another photo walkthrough of one of my fine art pieces. Today I'm taking you through an image that I created back in 2013, so it's definitely not a newer image. And there are a lot of things that as I was going through this image, prepping it for you today, I was thinking, man, I would do that differently. So why am I showing you an older image if my skills and my ability to use Photoshop have changed over the years? The main reason that I wanted to share this image with you is because not only is it a favorite in my portfolio, but it's one of the images that really taught me to look beyond my circumstances and think about how I could utilize different elements in either the studio or with Photoshop and really kind of go into my imagination to create. So one of the things that really used to hold me back as an artist was this idea that I didn't have access to what I needed and I didn't have the right tools to create. And I realize now that that was a big mindset block that I was creating for myself, but back then it seemed like a good excuse to not create, and it's a really great thing to complain about. The problem is that you don't end up creating work. So back in the winter of 2013, I really wanted to create an image of a woman blindfolded in a boat. And the problem is that it being winter, most of the water was frozen, and nobody that I knew, including myself, really wanted to get into a dress in a boat and be photographed. Not only that, I didn't even have a boat. I had a neighbor with a boat, but our pond nearby was frozen, and I think the boat had a hole in it, so definitely not safe circumstances. So what I did instead was I thought about what did I have on hand that I could turn into a boat. And so I decided to go into this studio with a baking dish and see what I could do. And I want to show you the image here. This is the final image that I created, and I'm actually going to walk you through some of the images that I shot as well so you can kind of get an idea of my thought process. So I'm going to pull up the shoot here. I'm just going to walk you through the images that I shot. So the first thing that I had shot in the studio was the baking dish itself, and I thought maybe I could liquefy it, maybe I could warp it a little bit and turn it into maybe a canoe or something like that. You can see that I have shot this on a reflective floor. So what this is this is chipboard. I had wooden floors in the studio, but I wanted to create the reflective look of water, and so I brought the chipboard underneath because, kind of like water, it would reflect light up onto the boat, and we would also, like I said, get the reflection. Oops. And then here what I've done is I've actually stuffed the dress that I was going to use into the baking dish. I don't think that I ended up using these shots, but my thought process behind this was that I wanted to be able to get some of the shadows playing on the dress to see what it would look like if the dress was actually in a boat with this material and with this color. So this was sort of a reference shot for me. Did a couple of these, and then here is a shot of me as the model in the boat. And so this was really just to kind of get not only the perspective that I wanted, but also obviously the shot of the model. And then here, what I did some variations on the pose, this specifically because I didn't know how deep I wanted the model to be within the boat. I didn't know how deep the boat itself was going to be. And so the hand here is on the cardboard box so that I can get the shot of the hand gripping the edge of the boat if I need to paste that in later, and potentially the angle of the arm as well. And here we have the blindfold. I think I pulled in the blindfold like last minute or something. It was actually a t-shirt, and you can see in the back there's a little butterfly clip holding the blindfold in the back. So this was probably the first time I'd also ever incorporated blindfolds into my work, which have become a big symbol that I rely very heavily on, but this is the first time that it kind of ever came up. And we have another shot here just of the hand. And then I was playing with the expression and also with the hand gesture here. This is just a very silly shot that didn't end up getting utilized. But I think what I was playing with here was maybe before I had decided that I wanted to even utilize the blindfold. I was really trying to play with expression. So this is where you can see too, by the way, the chipboard being used, and then just up against a white wall. And then here's just another shot of the blindfold, the hand, trying to get more of the body in case I needed to incorporate it, and really bad duck face actually. So this was the final image. You can see like the hand here that got pulled in. It looked like it was a single body that was used and then the blindfold was pulled in. So I want to walk you through kind of how this image got constructed with these different pieces, because it ended up being, I mean, it's a complex build. And like I said, you know, from the years that have intervened since I shot this, I might do it differently these days. I was relying on a lack of skill back then. But again, you know, I can see where there are mistakes in the image, but overall I'm happy with it. I'm going to let it be. But let me walk you through how this came to be. So this is the background that I used, and this is basically a shot of the wall. You can see there is like dirt all over the wall. There is areas where the sheetrock is popping up, but I just wanted to use kind of a neutral canvas to start building on. I don't do this anymore so much, but this was a technique that I was relying on pretty heavily in 2014. So that is kind of where I started. So actually I had the reflection of the boat here and I just layered in that background. I was like, I'm not even going to deal with that. I pulled in the boat into Liquify. So what I had basically done, and again, I think I do a better job these days of kind of keeping my images in sort of a natural state so that I can deconstruct them. But this shot was, if I were to open it, I think what I would have done is I would have probably rasterized this image so that I could transform it. Yeah, I can't transform it right now because of the way that I pulled it in. So if I had copied and pasted this into the image, what I would have done is a couple of things. The first thing that I probably would have done is transformed it, so Command or Control T, depending on what you're on, and then I'm right clicking and I'm just going into warp. And so by playing with my warp tool, I was able to start creating a different kind of angle on this dish here, and I would really be able to kind of start playing with how it sits in the water. And then what I would do is I would go into Liquify and I would start kind of doing the same thing, but maybe a little bit more fine-tuned. And so that's where I started pulling the edges up here, and I started to pinch the sides here a little bit more, trying to give it like I said, a little bit more of a canoe shape to it, as opposed to a baking dish shape. So this is a very kind of quick and dirty example of what I would have done there. But let's say this was how I wanted it to be. Click OK. It's pretty different. I did a much better job before. But then what I would do is go down here to my mask tool, and then with a brush on black, on a soft edge probably first, I would start to paint out anything that I didn't need, just to kind of get all of those edges over here. And then once I'd kind of gotten a pretty good swath out of the way, I would bring my hardness up and I would start to zoom in a little bit. I'm hitting Command plus on my Mac here, and then with my bracket on my keyboard, I can either make this smaller or larger. And so then with a smaller black brush, I would have come in, and that's probably too hard. So I would have had to vary the hardness here, because you can see I've got this sort of soft line that I want to mimic when I mask out. And let me just turn off the old boat there. And so I would have tried to keep some of that edge there, so that you can get the sense of the lip on the boat on that side. And then over here, I probably could have gotten away with a harder edge. Now you can see just in the grain here that I was probably shooting on a pretty high ISO, and so that's something that these days I probably would have tried to be a little bit better about. I would have tried to shoot on a lower ISO. It's also an older model camera that I was shooting with at the time, and so it didn't play with the higher ISO range as well as a newer model camera would be. But anyway, can't go back in time. So what I would have done is begun to just mask out anything that I didn't need here on the boat. And that's what would have gotten me to this point right here. And now I would love to go back and ask old self why old self didn't feel the need to get this right here. Maybe I thought that that's where the figure would be and I could be lazy. I don't know. Then what I did is I duplicated this and I created a, no, that's not what I did. Next, what I did is I put the model into the boat. So I had pulled open one of the shots that I had shown you. I had upped the ISO a little bit, or maybe with my levels just kind of brought up midtones, and I isolated her. And it looks like what I did was I just brought her in on a new layer. And so then what it looks like I did is I copied both of these and then pasted them as a new layer down here and then applied a zigzag. So let me show you what that's going to look like. So if I turned off everything else but these two layers, I could have gone up to select all and then copy merged. And then if I hit paste, I'm going to get an image. So really quickly, what happened here was that I was clicked on my layer right here, and when I pasted, it accidentally clipped it back to the layer there. So let's just unclip this really quickly, release clipping mask. And now we have this duplicate layer here that we've copied. And so now the model and the boat are on the same layer. What I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Command T and then right click and just flip vertical. And so now if I click OK, I can drag this down and I've got a little bit of a reflection. What I would do, and you can see I did this down here, is I dragged it below the original layer of the boat because the boat in real life would have been on top of the water. So next what I did is I went into Filter, Distort, and Zigzag. And I started to play with the different zigzags that one could do in order to create the kind of ripple effect that we might want. And so maybe what I had done, I know that I had some pretty large ripples there. So what I did was I just sort of played with this to see what would work for me. So now we've got some ripples in there, and I think I lowered the opacity of that. So now we've got this reflection in here. And so this is the original one. Slightly different ripple pattern, but very low opacity. You can see it's at about 22% here. So I also had a dodge and burn layer in here, it looks like, which looks like it was just to kind of bring, I don't know if that is doing anything, honestly. This might be just one of my like stray layers that I didn't clean up. Oh my. So now here is the blindfold from another image. And so this was kind of where I had stopped for a while. I was honestly ready to give up on this image at this point. I was like, this looks nothing like a boat. Well, this was a total failure, right? So I think I slept on this for a day or two. And then what I did was I came back to it and I pulled in a couple of different layers of texture to try to give this cracked paint look. And now it looks like I didn't mask out all of my texture very well. Again, I would love to go back to old self and say, why are your layers so messy? But this is how I worked back then, and you know, it created something, so we're gonna go with it. And I had also created a color balance layer, so it's clipped to this texture layer right here. And let's see what I did. So I brought the cyan and the magenta way down in my midtones and my blue way up. Nothing in my shadows and nothing in my highlights. So if we turn off this color balance layer, let's see what it does. It's just very yellow on the boat, and so it looks like I just needed to remove some of that yellow so that the texture would have been applied there. Now today what I might do is, because I wouldn't want to color cast on my boat, for example, is I might just convert my texture to black and white, and then start to play with the contrast of the texture a little bit more. But again, you know, with the skills that I had at the time, maybe I wasn't that experienced with that, and so I was throwing colors on there. You can see the stray colors here. So now I have no idea what this layer did. No idea what I was thinking here. I think I was trying to make water, and I think that I was failing again with water. So let's see where this goes. Now it looks like what I've done here with this layer is I have taken my reflection and I have duplicated it and blurred it again and tried to create some shadow to make it look like the boat is sitting on top of the water. I just want to go, oh, that's so cute. I'm really struggling. You can tell I'm really, really struggling with this. So I think this may have been where I let this image sit again for a little while. I think I was probably pretty frustrated with it and just didn't know if this was ever going to happen for me. So you can see here I've got a dodge and burn layer where I'm again trying to make my water feel more believable. So this image probably wouldn't have gone any further, except for the fact that I figured out how to make something that looked enough like water for me to feel like I could finish this image. And that's with this layer right here. This is a ripple layer. I'm going to show you how I did this. And there are probably better ways to do this. Today, honestly, what I would do is I would probably just take a stock shot of water that I had shot and put it in there. And in fact, I'll walk you through another image someday where I did exactly that. But for now, I didn't have a big stock library available to me, and I really don't like taking other people's work and bringing it into my own. I really try to stay away from it. There have been times where I've done it, but in this case, I decided I was going to create water. So I'm going to show you how that worked. So on a new layer, up here, I'm going to create a new layer. What I had done is I had created a gradient. So up here, I've got a black to white gradient, and this is just showing that it shifts over here, a linear gradient one side to another. And I had done a linear gradient diagonally across my image here. And then what I did was up in filter, I went back to my zigzag. And so I distort zigzag, and I had done, I think, amount 100 and then 10. And this style down here as pond ripples. So this is sort of showing you what that looks like. I hit OK, and it created some ripples. Then I ran that again. So if I go back up to filter, I can just rerun that past filter. And suddenly I have something that looks a little bit more like water. Then what I had done is I hit Command T, and I started to play with the perspective of this. And so suddenly, I'm going to zoom out here to show you, had something that looked a little bit more like water. And so what I did is I started playing with this a little bit to see if I could create the sense of water with that technique. And I took it a little bit further than what this is here, but this is basically the idea that I utilized to get to this down here. What I had done is I had also masked out some of the water back here and on the boat. What I would probably do these days is put the boat on top of the water, but again, this is me learning Photoshop as I'm going along. I also wish too that I hadn't masked out the edge. I wish that I had maybe made it fade into the background, because one of the things that I look at with this image that I don't like anymore is how I don't really see enough water and ripples around the boat in the back. And so I tried to cover it up with mist later, but again, being what it was, that's how I did it. So this is, I just completely removed the mist. I mean, not the mist, the ripples from the back. There's a few back there, but I wish I had done a better job of creating kind of a believable horizon line, and also just creating ripples that kind of faded into the background. So is what it is. So let me delete this, this layer here. And then what I did here is I created a dodge and burn layer, and then I did something similar with the ripple, not quite similar. I'm going to show you what I did. So when I created a dodge and burn layer, I actually just created an action for this, but I'm going to walk you through what a dodge and burn layer is and why I use it. So I go to layer, new layer, I name it dodge and burn, so I know what it is. And then I go to mode, and I go to soft light mode. And then I click fill with soft light neutral color 50% gray. And so what this does is it creates a layer on a blending mode that's just full of gray. And the 50% neutral, what that means is that even though we're applying the soft light, nothing is being affected. And so it creates this great place for us to actually play with a non-destructive dodge and burn. So what you can do is you can go in with a brush at low opacity, either with the white or the black, and you can actually start to paint in. I'll probably do maybe like the 20% range when I think of low opacity. And so you can see how that sort of dodges things a little bit there. Again, I'm being sloppy. And then burning in here. So with this sort of neutral canvas, what I did is on my gradient, I took this gradient tool right here and accidentally got it at an angle. But the reason that I think that I wanted to do this was to create a sense of light up by the face. I can't 100% remember what my thought process was in terms of wanting to burn it in there. I'll delete that layer. But I do like how it focuses the light up by the face, so that might have been part of my thought process there. Next, what I started to do was I started to throw in grunge, and I'm going to be totally honest with you. Back in the day, I utilized grunge to hide my mistakes in Photoshop. So I really looked at it as like, oh, well, I did a crappy job getting rid of this or blending this. Maybe the grunge will help hide it. So that's what I started trying to do. And so I pulled in a nice texture that I'd gotten here. I applied a black and white. And it looks like I've also got a couple of different adjustments in here. So I have, normally I try to keep my grunge together, but it looks like I didn't do that then. Here I'm playing with my tones and my curves. So you can see I had played a little bit with my midtones here on the RGB curve. But what I had done in here in my reds is I had pulled down into the greens in my shadows and a little bit in my midtones. And then I pulled the highlights up to red here. In my greens, it looks like I'm kind of making just a few adjustments here. So in my highlights, I'm pulling green into the highlights, a little bit into the midtones, and then pulling some greens into the shadows as well. And then on my blue curve, I'm all over the place. So I'm pulling some yellow into the highlights here, and then, nope, sorry, yep, and then blue into my shadows. And I'm not sure, I think I was just playing here at this point, honestly. Let me just go back and unmodify, because I think later on I was actually trying to undo some of the color that I had brought in. But, you know, part of the whole experience of creating work is to experiment. Now, this was a period in my artistic life where I started to develop some formulas. I actually literally wrote down a formula for myself because I was really interested in creating a body of work, and I wanted it all to start to look pretty cohesive, and so I didn't want my edits to be all over the place. But I think this might have been one of those early images where I was playing in order to figure out what that edit would actually look like. So then in my color balance layer that I pulled in here, it looks like in my midtones I've added some yellow and a little bit of red. Nothing on my shadows and nothing on my highlights. And then if I take you through, it looks like I had a selective color layer and I didn't end up using it. But what it did is it looks like it sort of removed some of the green and added some reds to the shadows down here. I'm going to leave it off. Again, this looks like one of my stray layers that I didn't clean up. Now what I really like to do when I save an image to reduce file size is get rid of layers that I didn't end up using in the final edit. So it looks like I started pulling in some more grunge here, so I'm going to show you what this group looks like. Like I said, I like to keep my grunges kind of together, and normally I apply them kind of at the end, but it looks like I've applied them sort of mid-edit here. So I've got a paper texture on multiply, and it's got a slightly darker bottom here, and so I utilized that to kind of create some darker depth on the water. I have another free texture that I got somewhere. It's called Grandmother something something, and I've got that on divide, which is interesting. I don't really use that anymore as a blending mode. And then I've got an adjustment layer on it for black and white, just because it was a pink texture and I didn't want the pinkish tones in there at all. Now this is a texture here. I called it Comp Grunge because it was a compilation of a lot of different grunge textures that I had used. I don't use it anymore, but it was kind of like a mashup of a lot of different things that I had layered to create a grunge layer. It's very early 2000s for my work, and I was sort of pulling it in here now, but it's, like I said, not something I use anymore. This is another texture of somebody's called Gainful. I don't remember where I got it from, but it was like a free texture. These days, so kind of like I was saying with stock images, these days I really only use my own textures, but I hadn't created a texture library at this point. And so this is me utilizing other people's textures and playing with what they did. And here again, I've turned on a black and white layer with a clipping mask to get rid of all of the oranges that grunge layer brought in. So let's move on. I threw a curve layer on here, and this one I have no adjustments on the channels. I'm just doing a simple S curve to bring down some of my darker midtones and bump up some of my lighter midtones, and just create some contrast. And I think that this probably would have been a place that I would have been happy to stop, except for the fact that I had already created an image prior to this one that I wanted to create a body of work around, and it was really much more limited in terms of color palette. And we can see back here, I think I was starting to get bothered by the fact that I hadn't created a very believable reality with these ripples. They sort of ended at the boat. So we're going to see how I try to play with that. So first thing here is I have this black and white layer, and you can see that I've got a layer mask on. So if I disable the layer mask, it's 47% opacity, and so I've just tried to remove a lot of the color that I had given to the image earlier. Remember that that curves layer that I was creating all of these different, red adjustments and blue adjustments. This is me basically undoing all of that. And so these days I'd probably just go back and remove that layer, but back then I just built on top of what was already there. That's why there's so many layers. And so what I did is using my mask tool and a soft black brush, I basically just brushed out all of the areas that I didn't want that to showcase on the image. And then another dodge and burn layer here. I'm trying to hide where the water meets the boat, because I didn't do a great job of really blending the two together, so I'm just trying to hide it. Then I have a curves layer here where you can see I'm just bringing down kind of my darker mid-tones a little bit. Again, one to kind of just create like a darkness for the image to sit in. Also probably to hide some of the stuff that wasn't working out too well in the shadows. But where I was kind of going with this is there was a show when I was a kid called Pirates of the Black Water, and I really liked that idea of the black water. It was this very dangerous thing, and so I wanted to kind of play with that. Now you can see I have a group here called Mist, and I have a number of different mist layers. So I'm going to turn this on. I'm going to sort of undo these and show you. So what these are is difference clouds in Photoshop. I'm going to show you what they look like. Now, what I had done, you can see that these are actually smart objects. So what I had done is I had done these in a different file and then pulled them over, but you could do them in your file right here if you wanted to. So what we would do is we would click on this button here with a little create new layer. It looks like a post-it note, doesn't it? Click on that. And then I would fill this with a color. You could do black or white. Let's do black and see what it does. Let me turn off all my mist. Now we go up to filter, render, difference clouds. Ta-da! And so suddenly we have difference clouds, and that's basically what these layers are right here. So what you can do with these is a number of different things. All of these I've played with the blending mode. So you could either do soft light, which is one of my favorite blending modes. Looks a little bit much here. So, because I hit hard light, that's why. Soft light. So this kind of creates that misty look here. You can play with the opacity a little bit. I also used screen too, and you can see that that creates a much more screened look. And maybe bring the opacity down. Now, one thing that I did is, again, I used that perspective warp. So I did Command T, right clicked, and then did perspective. And I just wanted this look of the mist kind of coming out towards the viewer a little bit more. You can also see, because these are smart objects, that I have filters on my mist. And so what that would be is just going to filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and then throwing a blur on there. And it just kind of creates a nice softness between all of that. And so the reason that I had done several different layers was because I would duplicate them. So I'm going to hit Command J to duplicate. And then I would hit Command T, and maybe I would flip this or rotate it. There we go. And start to play with how this kind of goes across the image, because when we're stuck in fog, you know, the fog can kind of distort where we feel like light is coming from and kind of give us different shifts in perspective and whatnot. And so that's why I have so many different layers here with the fog. I really like how that looks. So let me delete these here and show you that that is what I ended up doing here. I think we just did a better job than what I had done in the past, but again, live and learn. And it looks like I had also just kind of taken one of those layers and sort of done maybe another zigzag blur to kind of get, I've named it swirls. I don't really see it doing a whole lot in terms of swirling, but I did something there. So that's my mist. Threw another curves layer on here. Looks like it's just more contrast. Yep, little down in the mid-tones here, up in the upper quadrant there. And now I've thrown a black and white layer on here because I was struggling again with the color. I really didn't like how I had so much going on with all of these different colors in here. I felt like the story that I wanted to tell for this body of work was going to be about red, about white, black, and then little bits of flesh tone. And so I felt like all of these other kind of yellows and greens in here really distracted from the color palette that I wanted. So again, I would do this differently today, but what I thought would be the best way to handle this was I just created a layer of black and white. And then I took the prior colors and I put the layer on top of the black and white layer. And then what I did was a radial fill up here with my gradient tool. So you can see right here with this mask, what I had done is I had started, so this would be that radial fill right here, the radial gradient. And if I toggle X on my keyboard, you can see that it changes my palette. And so what I had done in my layer mask here was going from white to black, basically creating areas where I said in the white I want the color to show up and then I want it to fade to the black and white. I'm going to undo that so that you can see what I did here. Then what I did is it looks like I took a brush with just white and I painted in the areas that I wanted to keep. Now, one thing that I kind of question my old self with is why didn't I go in and get rid of some of these yellows here? I do these days. I think I find them a little bit distracting, and I think it would have been really nice if I had taken the time to just get rid of any of the yellow around the body. And so I would have needed to like really go in here with my brush tool and a higher opacity and gone in and just gotten rid of that. But again, that's not what I had done, and maybe there was a good reason for it back in the day. I don't know. But anyway, so there we go. We're going to get rid of those. So that's where I got to with this. I do find the yellow around the figure to be quite distracting. It's sort of a strange halo, but it is what it is. And on this next layer, it looks like what I'd been doing is instead of keeping adjustments, I was adjusting and then flattening and stamping. And I wouldn't recommend doing it this way because this increases the file size, and also just if I had ever wanted to walk back some of the adjustments between here and here, I wouldn't be able to do that. But it looks to me like what I had done is I had just gotten rid of some of those darker shadows that I had created with this curves layer right here. Again, learning, right? I have another dodge and burn layer here where it looks like I'm just creating a little bit of a lightning effect around some of the mist. I've got a bit of a vignette here where I'm trying to make sure that the eye doesn't travel down to these light spots here. And then it looks like I threw on a finishing texture here that was an old book cover. I got rid of the color that it was creating. Did another curves adjustment, which looks like it sort of undid what this did right here. It's very funny to kind of go back and see how you process old images. And then the final thing that I did here was it looks like I created a little bit more of a warp. So I had created a stamp all again. And the way that you do that, by the way, is you would do on a Mac, it's I think Command Option Shift E. I don't know what it is on a PC, I'm sorry. But what that does is it basically takes everything that is visible below the layer that you're on, and it creates it essentially a stamp. And so what I had done is I had gone in and probably done a Command T and then warp and moved some of the pieces around to kind of create a sense of, let's see, just the boat being slightly different and forward a bit, and it looks like it's a little bit squished more. And it also looks like I cleaned up some of the texture too and created a little bit more contrast. So there it is. That is the walkthrough of a very old image. And I think that this illustrates a couple of really interesting things for me that I want to share with you. One is that, you know what, if you don't know how to do something in Photoshop, it's okay. Try it anyway. You saw that there was a lot of starts and stops and things that probably would be considered failures and no-nos in this image. But this is still an image that I love. There are things that are wrong with it. There are things that I look at now and I'm like, oh, I really want to go and fix that. But at the same time, this image has also sold prints. It's sold book covers. It's good enough for my portfolio. And the two things that are so important to me in this learning process are that my skills have improved. Your skills will improve over time. It's all about practice, right? If we were musicians, we wouldn't expect to play a beautiful sonata the first time we sit down at the piano. Same thing with our skills, both as photographers and editors. It takes time and effort to really hone skills and techniques and to learn how to do something better. I actually created not a new version of this image, but a slightly different reimagining of this image, which I'll share a walkthrough with you later. And it is a boat, a real boat out in real water. And I'm sure someday I'll look back at all the things that I did wrong about that too. But I had a completely different set of skills that I was able to use on that shoot because of the things that I learned here and the things that I learned in the interim. And again, I love the fact that I decided to create with what I had. Even though I didn't have a boat back in 2013 or 14 when this was shot, I did have the chutzpah to try to make something out of almost nothing. And so those are the lessons that I hope that you take with you today, is that even if you don't have the props that you need, you don't have a boat in a pond, you still have a baking dish and you can still create a boat out of it. And even if you don't have models that are willing to sit out in the water in the freezing cold, you still have yourself. You know, there are still so many things that we can create with the resources around us. So that I really hope that in sitting through this walkthrough of all the things that I should have done better, you still come away with, wow, I'm okay with where I'm at right now. I have what I need to do what I want, and I'm going to learn as I go forward, and practice makes better, even if it doesn't make perfect. So I hope that you really enjoyed this. If you have questions, I would love to hear them in the comments. And I look forward to chatting with you again as we do another walkthrough. I'll talk to you later. Bye.